The snow fell the way bad nights always do, without warning and without mercy. Seoul was brutal in January. The kind of cold that didn't negotiate, that found every gap in your coat and made a home there. Most people had been inside for hours. Restaurants fogged up from the warmth. Taxis disappeared. The streets emptied the way streets do when the city decides it's done with you for the night. Serena Banks was not inside. She stood at the edge of the building's entrance, her chin-length black hair plastered against her cheeks, her red knit sweater doing nothing against the wind that came off the Han River like a warning. In her arms, a clipboard. On the clipboard, a delivery manifest she hadn't caused, hadn't lost, and hadn't been given a single resource to fix. Behind her, Sloane stood in the warmth of the lobby, arms crossed, already turning back toward the elevator. Sort it out or clean out your desk. She wanted to say something. She always wanted to say something. Instead, she pulled her sweater tighter, as if that would help, and stepped out into the blizzard, because needing a job teaches you to swallow things that should be screamed. She made it almost 2 full blocks. Then her knees hit the ice, and the clipboard skidded out of her hands, and the snow came up to meet her like it had been waiting. What Serena didn't know, what Sloane, watching from his warm window, would never have the clarity to understand, was that a black sedan had been idling at the far end of that street for the last 30 minutes. And the man inside it, Han Joon-ki, the man whose name made district captains go quiet and rival bosses reconsider their decisions overnight, had watched her walk out of that building with an expression on his face that his guards had never seen before and did not have a name for. He had been watching her for 4 months. Not as a target. Not as leverage. Not as anything that made sense inside the world he ran. Just as her, the woman in the red sweater who graded papers at the bus stop in the rain and never seemed to notice that the most dangerous man in Seoul had started timing his route home around her schedule. Han Joon-ki did not lose control of himself. He had not lost control of anything since he was 19 years old and decided that feelings were a liability he could not afford. He was out of the car before the thought finished forming. Before we go any further, if you've ever believed in a love that found someone at exactly the wrong moment and exactly the right time, this story is for you. Like, subscribe, and stay close. You won't want to miss what happens next. The snow kept falling. Joon-ki crossed the street in 6 steps, his black overcoat catching the wind, snow dusting his shoulders like the city was trying to make him part of the scene. He dropped to one knee beside her in the ice, this man who sat at tables where nations negotiated, who never knelt for anything, and turned her over gently with gloved hands. Her face was pale. Her lips had gone the color of cold. He pulled off his coat without thinking. His hands, his staff would later agree, moved before he did. And that single, unguarded, undeniable moment was the beginning of everything. Serena had stopped counting the hours somewhere around the 11th. That was the thing about working for Sloane, time stopped being yours. It became his. Your lunch break, his. Your evenings, his. The quiet 20 minutes you used to sit by the window with tea before the city woke up, his. He took things without asking because asking implied you had the right to say no, and Sloane had never once considered that possibility. She was running the 3rd floor inventory check when he called her into his office at 9:30. She knew before she opened the door. She always knew. There was a specific quality to the silence that preceded his worst moments, a held breath the whole office took at once. He didn't look up when she entered. The Daehang client's delivery had been misrouted. An event tomorrow morning, 300 guests and the florals and centerpiece inventory were sitting in a warehouse on the wrong side of the city. His voice was flat, detailing the failure the way a man describes weather. No heat. No interest in her response. Just the facts of the disaster and the clear implication that it had her name on it, regardless of the trail of emails that said otherwise. She had sent those emails. She had flagged the routing error 6 days ago. She said nothing. He held out the clipboard. Fix it or don't bother coming in tomorrow. Serena took it. Her fingers were already cold. The building's heating had been uneven all week and her desk sat closest to the draft, and she thought, distantly, that this was the part where a smarter woman would quit. A braver one. A woman who hadn't spent the last 8 months convincing herself that endurance was the same thing as strength. She wasn't hungry because she'd forgotten to eat. She was hungry because she'd calculated her account balance at lunch and made the quiet, practiced decision that the convenience store triangle sandwich was not something she could justify today. She stepped outside. The cold hit her like a verdict. Her red sweater was not enough. It had never been enough for a night like this, but it was what she had, so she pulled it close with one hand and held the clipboard with the other and walked, because walking was the only option left to her, and she was very good, by now, at choosing the only option left. She didn't see the sedan. She was too busy watching her feet on the ice, too busy doing the math on the delivery, too busy refusing, with everything she had, to let herself cry on a public street in the middle of Seoul in January. But the sedan was there. Black. Still. Engine running low. And the man inside it had gone completely rigid the moment the building's door opened and a woman in a red sweater walked out into the storm alone. Han Joon-ki's jaw tightened. His gloved hands stayed on the wheel. For now. She went down without a sound. That was the part that stayed with him afterward, not the fall itself, but the silence of it. No cry, no gasp, no outstretched hands trying to break the impact. Just a woman who had been holding herself upright through sheer will, and then wasn't anymore. Like a light going out. Like something that had been burning too long finally running out of what it needed to keep going. Joon-ki was out of the car before she hit the ground. His driver said nothing. His guard in the passenger seat said nothing. They had worked for Han Joon-ki long enough to understand that there were moments when speaking was the wrong decision, and this, whatever this was clearly one of them. They had never seen him move like that. Not toward a threat, not toward a negotiation, not toward anything. Just across a snow-covered street in dress shoes, his coat already coming off his shoulders before he reached her. He dropped to one knee beside her and turned her over carefully. Her face was wrong. Too pale, too still, her lips drained of color, her black bangs stuck flat against her forehead. Her fingers were curled around the clipboard like her body hadn't gotten the message yet that she'd fallen. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck and found her pulse, faint, present, and something unknotted in his chest that he hadn't realized had been pulled tight. He wrapped his coat around her without deliberation. It was an automatic thing, the kind of movement that lives below thought. Then he lifted her. One arm beneath her knees, one behind her back. She weighed less than made sense for a person who had clearly been holding up this much. That bothered him in a way he didn't examine. He carried her across the street and his driver had the rear door open before he reached the car. He got in. She stayed in his arms. The door closed. "Home," he said. One word. His voice was steady. His jaw was not. The car moved through Seoul in silence. The city outside was dark and snow-blurred, the streetlights smearing orange across the wet glass. Inside, nothing moved. His guard kept his eyes forward. His driver kept both hands on the wheel. Joon-ki looked down at her face. Her breathing was shallow, but it was there. He counted the seconds between each exhale the way he had once counted seconds between gunshots, with the specific, focused attention of a man who understands that some intervals matter more than others. 11 seconds. 9. 12. He had spent 4 months finding reasons to idle his car on her street. For months telling himself it was nothing, that she was no one, that whatever pulled his attention toward a woman in a red sweater grading papers in the rain was something he could outlast. He looked at her now and understood, with the clarity that only arrives too late, that he had never been going to outlast it. She came awake the way people do when their body knows something their mind hasn't processed yet, all at once, heart already running, eyes open before she'd decided to open them. The ceiling was wrong. Too high. Too clean. Soft recessed light instead of the water stain she'd been meaning to report to her landlord for 3 months. She sat up fast and the room tilted, and she grabbed the edge of the mattress with both hands and took stock of everything in rapid, frightened sequence: silk sheets, cream walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, a city glowing 40 stories below her, a heater that hummed with the quiet confidence of something that had never once been insufficient. Then she saw him. He was sitting in a chair at the far side of the room, fully dressed, one ankle crossed over his knee, watching her with the patient expression of a man who had expected her to wake up exactly like this. She knew his face. Seoul had a way of teaching you certain names whether you asked or not. Han Joon-ki was the kind of name that came up in lowered voices, in the particular hush that fell over a table when someone said it too loudly by accident. She had heard it 3 times in 8 months. Each time, the person who said it looked over their shoulder afterward. I need to leave. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. It's 3 in the morning. I don't care. You were hypothermic 2 hours ago. He said it the way someone states the temperature outside. Factual. Unarguable. The doctor has already come and gone. You're stable now, but you're not dressed for the weather, and the blizzard hasn't stopped. She swung her legs off the bed and stood. The room moved. Her knees made a decision entirely independent of her pride, and she caught the nightstand with one hand, gripping it hard, her eyes closed, willing her body to cooperate with her just this once. It didn't. She sat back down on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor and hated every single thing about this moment with a thoroughness that was almost clarifying. Across the room, Han Joon-ki said nothing. He didn't offer help. He didn't move toward her. He simply waited, with the stillness of a man who understood that reaching for her right now would be the wrong thing, and had made the deliberate choice not to. That restraint, somehow, was worse than if he'd spoken. Why, she said carefully, did you bring me here? Because you were dying in the street. You don't know me. A pause. Something shifted behind his eyes, brief, contained, gone before she could read it properly. No, he said. It wasn't agreement. It wasn't denial. It sat in the space between both things, and the weight of it followed her long after the room went quiet. She didn't mean to stay for breakfast. She had every intention of leaving as soon as her legs remembered their purpose. She would call a taxi, go home, sleep for 4 hours, and then spend the rest of the morning deciding whether any of this had actually happened. That was the plan. It was a sensible plan. Then she smelled eggs. She found her way to the kitchen by following the sound of something quiet and domestic that had no business existing in a penthouse like this. Han Joon-ki stood at the stove with his sleeves rolled to the elbows, jacket gone, no guards in the room. He looked like a different person from the man in the chair. Less like a name people said carefully and more like just a man, standing barefoot on heated tile, cracking eggs into a pan with the focused attention of someone who had decided this task deserved his full consideration. She stopped in the doorway. He didn't turn around. Sit down. Not a command exactly. Something quieter than that. She sat because her legs still hadn't fully forgiven her, and because something about the scene made argument feel beside the point. He placed a cup in front of her first. Tea, pale gold, with nothing in it. No milk, no sugar. She wrapped both hands around it and looked up at him. He had already moved back to the stove. How did you know? She asked. How did I know what? How I take my tea. A beat. Small, but present. He kept his eyes on the pan. You order it the same way every morning. At the place on Yongamaro. Before your first class. The kitchen went very still. Serena set down her cup. She thought about the cafe on Yongamaro, small, always slightly too warm, the ajumma behind the counter who never wrote down her order anymore because she already knew it. She thought about every morning she had sat in the window seat with her lesson plans and her 2 pale tea and the comfortable anonymity of being a foreigner in a city that mostly looked through her. She had not, in any of those mornings, noticed a black sedan. But it had been there. She understood that now. How long? She asked. He brought the plate to the table and set it in front of her. Rice, eggs, soup, sliced fruit, arranged with a care that didn't announce itself. He sat across from her and looked at her directly for the first time since she'd walked in. For months, he said. She stared at him. And you never. No. Why? He picked up his chopsticks. Something moved across his face, not quite an answer, not quite deflection. Something that looked, unexpectedly, like honesty that hadn't yet found its words. Eat, he said quietly. You didn't have lunch yesterday. She opened her mouth. Closed it. She ate. It started, as most dangerous things do, with a casual word in the wrong room. One of Joon-ki's junior lieutenants mentioned it over lunch, not carelessly, not with intent, just the way people fill silence when they're comfortable and not thinking about who else is listening. The boss had brought someone home. A woman. Foreign, young, the kind of quiet that made you look twice. Nobody had seen him like that before. Nobody had seen him move like that before. The man sitting across the table listened without reacting. By evening, the information had traveled 3 times removed from its source, which was exactly far enough to reach Park Il-sung. He heard it in his penthouse on the 42nd floor of a building he owned under a name that didn't belong to him. His aide delivered it the way aides deliver things to men like Bach, carefully, watching his face for permission to have spoken at all. Bach said nothing for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was not a pleasant thing to witness. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting for a particular door to open and had just heard the latch. Foreign, he repeated. No family here. No connections. None that we've found. He rolled a coin across his knuckles, back and forth, the way he did when his mind was moving faster than the room. Han Joon-ki had held the advantage in the city for 6 years on the strength of one thing above all others. He had nothing that could be touched. No sentiment. No softness. No door through which a man could reach him and make him feel it. Find out everything, Bach said. Her name. Where she lives. Where she goes. He paused. Find out what she means to him. Serena noticed the SUV on the 3rd day. It was parked across the street from the penthouse building, dark gray, engine off, and it had been there since morning. She might have dismissed it. Seoul had no shortage of parked cars, but it was still there at noon, and again at 4, and the man in the driver's seat hadn't moved. She stood by the window with her tea cooling in her hands and felt something she recognized from a place she couldn't quite name. A prickling at the back of her neck. A low, animal awareness that something nearby was paying attention. She had felt it before, in small doses, living alone in a foreign city. The sensation of being located. This was different. This was deliberate. When Joon-ki came home that evening, she was still by the window. She watched him clock her expression the moment he walked in. The way his pace didn't change, but his eyes did, sharpening, reading the room the way men like him read rooms. There's a car outside, she said. It's been there all day. He set down his keys. The pause lasted exactly 1 second too long. It's handled, he said. And she knew, with the certainty of someone who had learned to listen to the things people didn't say, that it wasn't. He told her to get ready to go outside at 5:15. She looked at him the way she had looked at him several times over the past 6 days, like she was deciding whether the statement deserved a response or a refusal, and then went to find her shoes. The red sweater was clean, returned to her without comment by someone on his staff. Her coat, the thin one from before, was somewhere in the building, but when she reached the entryway it was not on the hook where she had left it. Joon-ki was standing at the hall closet. He produced the coat the way he did most things, without preamble, without announcement. Long, black, cashmere, the kind of weight that meant it would stop the cold completely and not ask anything of you in return. He held it open behind her. She didn't move immediately. You bought that, she said. It wasn't a question. Your coat is inadequate. When did you? Serena. The way he said her name was not impatient. It was something else, quiet, deliberate, like he had been saving the sound of it and was spending it carefully. She turned and slid her arms into the sleeves, and the warmth was immediate and total, the kind that made her realize how cold she had been accepting for months without naming it. He lifted her hair free from the collar. His fingers barely made contact with the back of her neck. She stopped breathing for a moment. Then he reached back into the closet and produced a scarf, dark gray, thick wool, and wrapped it slowly around her neck, his gloved hands working close to her jaw, adjusting the folds with the focused attention of someone for whom this task was not small. He tucked the ends into the coat and stepped back and looked at her with an expression she had no category for. They walked out through a side entrance she hadn't known existed. The park nearby was quiet and white and still, the trees holding snow on their branches like they'd been asked to. Joon-ki walked beside her with his hands in his pockets, matching her pace exactly, not leading. The city hummed somewhere distant. Here there was only the crunch of their footsteps and the occasional soft collapse of wind through branches. She had stopped beneath a tall tree when a clump of snow released from the branch above her and dusted her shoulders. She looked up at the bare branch, at the sky beyond it, and smiled, small and unguarded, the kind that happens before you remember you're being watched. Joon-ki looked away. Quickly, like she'd caught him doing something he hadn't meant to do. Like the sight of her smiling in the snow was something he needed a moment alone with. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's just a coat." "No," she said. "It isn't." He kept his eyes on the tree line. "No," he agreed quietly. "It isn't." She had been sitting on the floor for an hour before he knocked. One knuckle, soft, the kind of knock that offers instead of demands. She almost didn't answer. Then she said, "It's open," because the alternative was lying in the dark pretending to be asleep, and she had run out of energy for pretending things. He came in without turning on the light. No suit. No tie, no armor, none of the careful construction she had come to recognize as the version of himself he wore like a second skin. Just a black t-shirt and loose pants and bare feet on the hardwood, and he looked so unexpectedly human that something in her chest contracted. He sat on the floor across from her, his back against the opposite wall, and for a long time neither of them said anything. The room was lit only by the city coming through the glass, pale and ambient, the light of 10,000 windows softening everything it touched. Outside, the snow had gentled to almost nothing. Seoul breathed quietly beneath them. She waited. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice was different at this hour. Lower, slower, with none of the careful control that usually lived in it. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I know." A pause. "I want to tell you anyway." She said nothing. She pulled her knees closer to her chest and watched him and waited. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at her. "The first time I saw you, you were at the bus stop on Seoul. It was raining. Not light rain, the kind that makes sensible people find a doorway." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "You were sitting on the bench with your phone in your lap, grading papers, completely unbothered. Like the rain didn't have jurisdiction over you." Serena remembered that morning. She remembered being late and refusing to run and deciding the papers couldn't wait. She had not noticed a car. "I told my driver to circle the block," Joon-ki said. 3 times. He said it without apology, without performance. Just a fact he had been carrying. "After that I knew which cafe you used, which bus you took, which corner you cut through when you were running behind. I knew all of it and I did nothing with it because he stopped. Started again. Men like me don't get to want things like you. Clean things. I know what I am. I know what this life costs the people who get close to it." The room held the words after he finished. Serena looked at him, this man who controlled half of Seoul sitting cross-legged on her floor in the dark, telling her he had circled a block in the rain 3 times because of her, and felt the wall she had been carefully maintaining develop a crack so clean and complete it was almost silent. She didn't speak. But she didn't look away either. And he understood the difference. He said nothing to her about what he'd found. That was a choice, and he made it deliberately. Bok Il-sung's people had been outside for 4 days. They had photographs of the building, of the entrance, of the one afternoon Serena had stood by the lobby window long enough to be visible from the street. Joon-ki's people had intercepted 2 calls. The shape of what was coming was clear enough. He did not tell her. Not because he thought she couldn't handle it, but because there was something else that needed handling first. Derek Sloane. It took 3 days. Joon-ki worked the way he worked everything quietly, completely, without leaving a surface that could be appealed. On the first day, his legal team filed 11 labor violation complaints across 3 government agencies. Unpaid overtime, withheld wages, documented instances of workplace endangerment, all of it supported by security footage that Sloane had never thought to wonder about. By afternoon, the company's primary investor had made a phone call asking uncomfortable questions. On the second day, the supply contracts dissolved. No argument, no negotiation. Just a series of polite emails citing brand alignment, arriving within 4 hours of each other from vendors Sloane had spent years cultivating. He spent the evening on the phone getting nothing but voicemail. On the third day, the forensic accountants finished what they'd started. The embezzlement had been running for 18 months, client deposits skimmed, invoices falsified, offshore accounts that Sloane had built with the confidence of a man who believed his own invisibility. Joon-ki's people traced it in 40 hours. The documentation went to a financial crimes prosecutor by noon. The warrant was signed before sunset. That evening, Joon-ki set the car keys on the counter in front of Serena and stepped back. She looked at the keys. Then at him. He said nothing. He simply moved aside. She wore the black cashmere coat. The building looked smaller than she remembered, or maybe she had simply gotten larger in some way she hadn't noticed yet. She rode the elevator to the 3rd floor and walked through the open-plan office and felt her former colleagues look up and then quickly look away, the way people do when a room has already decided something and is waiting for the formality to catch up. Sloane was at his desk, gray-faced, surrounded by the evidence of the last 3 days. He looked up when she entered and for a moment didn't recognize her. That told her everything. She stood in front of his desk and spoke clearly and without performance. "You sent me out to freeze. You have done it before and you intended to do it again. I have worked my last hour for you, and I want you to know that I know exactly what you are." She placed her badge on the desk. "I quit." She turned and walked out. The elevator doors closed behind her. She did not look back. Not once. She was halfway to the car when the world came apart. The first shot was so sharp and close that she felt it before she understood it, a crack that rearranged the air, followed immediately by the building's lobby window dissolving into a cascade of glass that caught the winter light on the way down. Then the screaming started, the way it always does, a half-second behind the danger, people's voices arriving late to what their bodies already knew. The driver had her before she could react. One arm across her chest, pulling her down and backward, her knees hitting pavement, his body angling over hers as 2 more shots came in fast succession, precise, methodical, aimed not at the building, but at the sedan. At where she had been standing 3 seconds ago. At the space her presence created. She understood then. This was not random. This was a message with her name on it. She was moved quickly, efficiently, through a sequence of events she couldn't fully track, a vehicle she hadn't seen before, a route that turned twice within the first block, the driver on the phone in Korean too fast for her to follow. She pressed the back of her hand to her forehead and it came away red. Glass, somewhere in the chaos. She hadn't felt it happen. The safe house was 40 minutes outside the city center. Nondescript building, side entrance, 2 men at the door who stepped aside without being asked. She was brought through a narrow hallway and into a room with bare walls and a single lamp and Han Joon-ki already standing in the middle of it. He crossed to her before the door closed behind her. His hands came up to her face, both of them, black gloves still on, cupping her jaw with a carefulness that contradicted the urgency in every other part of him. He tilted her face toward the light and found the cut above her brow, and something moved through his expression that she had never seen there before. Not anger. Not the cold, controlled stillness he wore when things went wrong. Fear. Raw and unmanaged and completely unguarded. "It's small," she said. "I'm fine." He didn't seem to hear her. His eyes moved over her face like he was checking every part of it, like he needed to confirm with his own hands that she was intact. "Joon-ki." He stopped. His eyes met hers. "I've been watching you for 4 months," he said, trying to convince myself this wasn't what it was. His voice was wrecked in a way she had never heard from him, stripped of every layer he usually kept between himself and the world. "That I was being careful. That I was just watching. That it didn't mean anything that I knew which tea you ordered, and which bench you preferred, and how you looked in the rain when you thought no one could see you." His hands were still on her face. "I was wrong," he said. "About all of it." The safe house had thin walls and a heater that clicked every few minutes like it was counting something. Serena learned the rhythm of both days by the sounds Joon-ki made in the other room, the low, controlled cadence of his voice on the phone, the silences between calls that lasted exactly long enough for her to wonder what he wasn't saying. The moment each night when the calls stopped and his footsteps came down the hallway and he knocked once before opening the door. He sat beside her both nights. Not across the room, not in the chair by the window. Beside her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion he carried without displaying it, the particular tension of a man managing something large and dangerous from the inside out. On the first night, he told her about Bakilsung, the history of it, not the version that circulated in whispers across Seoul, but the real one. The years of accumulated grievance, the rival operations, the way men like Bak waited for openings with the patience of people who had decided that patience was a weapon. He told her that the moment word spread she was in his building, she had become the opening. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked one question. How long have you known he was watching me? Since the second day. She absorbed that. And you said nothing. I was handling it. That's not what I asked. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. It isn't. On the second night, the conversation went somewhere else entirely. The operational talk was finished. Whatever was moving in the city had been set in motion and could not be hurried. What remained was just the two of them in a lamplit room with nowhere else to be. He told her why he had never approached her. She had heard pieces of it on the floor of the guest room, in the kitchen over cooling tea, but this was the full version, unedited. Men like him, he said, understood the cost of attachment. He had watched it ruin people he respected. He had spent 15 years making sure there was nothing in his life that could be reached through, no door an enemy could open to get to him. And then it was a rainy Tuesday on Siagangaro, and a woman in a red sweater was grading papers on a bench in a downpour, completely undisturbed by the fact that the sky was falling on her. And something he had spent 15 years building very carefully came loose. I told my driver to circle the block, he said. 3 times. Serena looked at him. Then she laughed. It came from somewhere genuine and unguarded, bright and sudden in the small room, and Joon-ki went completely still the way people do when something catches them off guard and turns out to be exactly what they needed. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. It was the best sound he had ever heard, and they both knew he would do considerably more than circle a block to hear it again. The news came on the 3rd morning. Joon-ki took the call in the other room. She heard his voice low, brief, final, and then silence, and then he came and stood in the doorway for a moment before crossing to where she sat on the edge of the bed and settling beside her. It's done, he said. Bakilsung's operation is finished. His people have scattered. She nodded. She had learned, over these 3 days, to hear what lived underneath his words. Done meant something specific in his world. She didn't ask for details. He didn't offer them. You're safe, he said. She believed him. That was the thing she hadn't expected somewhere between the snowstorm and the safe house and 2 nights of conversation in a lamplit room. She had started believing him. Not because he was powerful, not because he had dismantled Sloane's company without raising his voice, but because he was the only person in recent memory who had noticed she hadn't eaten lunch and considered it worth remembering. He stayed beside her after he said it. Didn't move, didn't reach for his phone. Just sat with the stillness of a man who had something left to say and was deciding how to say it honestly. I've been thinking, he began, about what comes after this. She waited. I inherited something I didn't choose. Built it further than my father did because I didn't know what else to do with the thing I'd been handed. He looked at his hands. The tattoo climbing the side of his neck caught the pale morning light. I told myself it was duty. Legacy. That the name meant something worth protecting. A pause. It was easier than admitting I had nothing else. The room was very quiet. I'm stepping back, he said. Not disappearing, that's not something I can do cleanly or quickly. But restructuring. Moving toward legitimate operations. Handing off what I can. He turned to look at her. It won't be fast and it won't be simple. But I'm doing it. Because of me, she said carefully. Not entirely. His voice was measured, precise in the way of someone who wanted to be understood correctly. For the version of myself that showed up, without permission, the first time I watched you sit in the rain and refuse to be bothered by it. I want to build something that man could inhabit. He held her gaze. Whether you're beside me or not. Serena was quiet for a long time. She looked at this man who had circled a block 3 times in the rain, who had counted her breaths in the back of a car, who had wrapped a scarf around her neck like it was something sacred, who was now willing to dismantle his empire not to win her, but to become someone worthy of the wanting. She reached over and took his hand. The tattooed one. The dangerous one. She laced her fingers through his and held on. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He exhaled long, slow, complete, like a man setting down something very heavy he had been carrying for a very long time. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn. Serena noticed it the moment she stepped into the hallway, a quality of light coming through the small window at the end of the corridor, pale and clean and different from the gray that had pressed against every surface for the past week. She stood there for a moment just looking at it. Joon-ki appeared beside her with her coat, the black cashmere one, held open without a word. She slid her arms in. He lifted her hair from the collar. Neither of them remarked on the fact that this had become a thing they did now, a small habitual tenderness that had arrived without announcement and stayed. They walked out through the side entrance together. Seoul was extraordinary. She hadn't expected to step out of a safe house after 3 days of locked doors and low voices and find the city looking like something worth the trouble. But the snow had settled clean over everything, and the winter sun was coming in low and pale, and the streets glittered in a way that made the whole city look like it had been freshly decided. Like it had woken up and chosen to be beautiful this morning specifically. She exhaled and watched her breath disappear into the cold air. Joon-ki walked beside her to the car. He opened the door and she looked at him for a moment, the sharp jaw, the tattoo just visible above his collar, snow still dusting his shoulders from the walk, and then she stepped in without hesitation. No pause, no internal negotiation. Just in. He slid in beside her. Their shoulders touched. Not almost. Not the careful proximity of two people pretending not to notice each other. Fully, deliberately, the way you lean into something when you have decided to stop pretending it isn't exactly where you want to be. Neither of them pulled away. The car pulled out onto the road. Seoul opened up ahead of them, wide and bright and indifferent to what it had put them through, the way cities are, already moving toward the next thing, the next morning, the next version of itself. Buildings caught the sun. People moved along the pavements. Somewhere a food cart was already open, steam rising from it in slow curls. Behind them, the snow on the safe house steps was already beginning to melt, the edges softening, water finding the cracks in the concrete and disappearing into them. All that white, all that cold, quietly undoing itself in the morning light. Serena looked out at the city and felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, that the thing ahead of her was larger than the thing behind her. Not fixed. Not simple. Not without the complications that came with a man like him and a world like his and the long, necessary work of becoming. But real. And chosen. And hers. Joon-ki's hand found hers on the seat between them. He didn't look at her when he did it. She didn't look at him. They both held on. If you felt this story in your chest, the snow, the silence, the slow and stubborn unraveling of two people who found each other at exactly the wrong time and chose each other anyway, then don't let it end here. Serena didn't survive Derek Sloane's cruelty and Bok Il-sung's violence and 5 months of making herself small just for you to close the tab. Han Joon-ki didn't circle a block 3 times in the rain, count her breaths in the back of a car, or dismantle an empire one careful, quiet piece at a time for you to scroll past without feeling it. This is a story about what happens when the most overlooked woman in the room turns out to be the only thing the most powerful man in the city cannot walk away from. About what it costs to be chosen. About what it takes to finally, after everything, choose yourself first and then let someone in. If that moved you, if you found yourself holding your breath somewhere between the snowstorm and the safe house and a hand taken in the dark like this, share it with someone who needs to believe that being quiet and tired and underestimated is not the same as being unworthy of a love that rearranges everything. Subscribe for more stories about people who survive the cold and find something warm waiting on the other side. And if you've ever been Serena, overlooked, overworked, walking into a blizzard because someone told you to, this one was always for you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the snow stopped.